I don't tend to dismiss when people's call for socialism today, because I think the situation with global capitalism is so out of control and so unhealthy and so dangerous to across the board, to children, to the ecology, to local communities, to the psychic and emotional health of individuals. It's a bona fide disaster. So I think the call for socialism is a genuine call for a different system. I don't necessarily agree with someone like, let's say, AOC and her vision for America. But at the same time, I don't dismiss her critique of the current situation and the desire to build something new. But one of the things that to me is very real is that you're not going to get a harmonious system, like a hypothetically harmonious system like socialism, if you have a lot of very spiritually and if you have a spiritually and emotionally sick population, because the idea of socialism is predicated on the idea of selflessness. It's wanting to be part of a community and part of a society in which all people are treated equally, not just in a legalistic sense, but also in the basic economic sense. And when you live in a ultra-competitive capitalist framework, it's very hard to make that transition. And that's something that I noticed that Bernie Sanders and AOC really haven't addressed that much. They haven't addressed the psychological dimension or the psychological transformation that would be necessary for a country like America to shift from a frantic, manic, capitalist system to something like socialism. So to your point, I do think that if you just made the shift from American capitalism to socialism, I think it would be a bona fide disaster. I think it would be an absolute disaster. But at the same time, I am personally very much in favor of a system that is more socially based than what we have right now. There's no doubt about that. I don't want to call it. It would also entail speaking at length about the psychic and spiritual and emotional transformation of society as well, not just addressing purely the material transformation in terms of the economy.
Well, that is exactly where I hoped would come to, is that isn't it interesting that our political leaders, religious leaders, spiritual leaders aren't addressing that issue, that all along America's been getting sicker and sicker, our youth are becoming sicker. I hadn't been exposed to the network television for years, and in the last position I had, there was a monitor, and it came on every day, watched the news, and it got to the point where I was watching, the talking heads report a school shooting as though it were a car accident. Oh, we had another school shooting today, and then they show the scenes, the horrific scenes of the kids crying, the parents crying, carrying the dead bodies out, and now the weather. Really? Really, America? Really? We've come to this, and we live with this and accept that, oh, well, our kids can't go to school without worrying about whether there's a lockdown, and they practice lockdown. This is part of the way. Excuse me. It's an interesting that with COVID, there are no mass shootings. There's no more school shootings so far. It kind of took away all of those things. And yet, are the leaders talking about what's really going to save you is what you mentioned earlier, living in the moment, being mindful, being selfless, having a sense that you have a higher purpose, that you're connected to something that is not just tangible, that there's something intangible, spiritual about us. And that is, I think, where the mindset has to be addressed, where those are going to be the individuals that will get through this.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that I feel like that dimension of human community and human subjectivity will be addressed at some point on the political level, and sooner rather than later, because I think that it somehow has to be addressed, and I do believe that it will.
Well, you did it in your post today, that Peter Thiel, I'll quote the modern age will not be permanent and ultimately will give way to something very different. One must never forget that one day all will be revealed, that all injustices will be exposed, and that those who perpetuated them will be held to account.
Yes, that's a passage from an essay that Thiel wrote in a collection called Politics and Apocalypse. And it's a collection that looks at the writings of the French anthropologist René Girard, who's very, very influential to my own worldview and my own thought. And of course, a very, very Christian viewpoint of things. It's really an apocalyptic viewpoint that everything will be revealed, and because the etymology of the word apocalypse is to unveil, to show, and I think that yes, we are living in apocalyptic times. We are living in end times, and I think what's interesting is that. What's interesting specifically about the word apocalypse is that, because apocalypse means it's revealing something that we didn't know. It's showing us. And what's so interesting about digital culture, but also, too, in the Christian sense, even though what you see might not be great, it might be pretty horrific, it produces transformation. It's an event that brings forth a new subjectivity. You know, digital culture is very apocalyptic too, and certainly the current state of contemporary American political culture is apocalyptic in the sense that there's this obsession with doxing people and unmasking people and unveiling people and, like, you know, exposing people on Twitter or whatever you do. I mean, that's a whole apocalyptic dimension, but it's the opposite way in the sense that it's meant to destroy people, not to induce some kind of transformation. So I think Thiel's quote was very interesting, and again, it's actually the last part of his of this whole essay, which is a fascinating essay. And he talks about how the modern age is at a deadlock, or the contemporary situation that has been developing since the period of the Enlightenment, with someone like John Locke, whose writing was so influential to the founding of American society, that we live in a situation where the wheels aren't moving anymore. Like there's something has to give, and that and what's going to give. But what's going to give is not necessarily some kind of economic transformation or some kind of social transformation through a program like socialism. What's going to give is that we're going to find out something about who we are as human beings. The question of what is a human being, I mean, that's not really a serious question anymore for philosophers or scientists, people don't ask, that's not something people study. Yes, they study, neuroscientists study elements of the human brain, and they try to map out the neural cartography of human beings. But that's not really asking what is a human being. It's always, exactly. First and foremost for me, in my writing and in the work that I do in Peru, it's always, what is a human being? What is a human being? And I think that question will come back again with force at some point, with force. And that's what we're alluding to in that passage, that all will be known, all will be revealed, the suffering will be undone. And that's it's pie in the sky, but that cuts to the very heart of the idea of hope. And to have that hope that one day that will happen, that keeps me going every day, because we like the situation that we're living in right now is very, very hopeless if you have that connection, some kind of transcendent sense of hope that something's going to happen. Without that, you have a very real shot, unless you're not supported very strongly by a family or a community or something, of descending into real existential despair. But it's also interesting that someone like Peter Thiel wrote it, who of course is a world-famous investor. He's the founding investor of Facebook, which is the cause of so much misery, and the entire horizon of social media is so problematic the way it's currently structured. Thiel was a student of Girard's when Girard was lecturing at Stanford, and to encounter the ideas of René Girard it's really life-changing. His ideas are so revolutionary, and his interpretation of Christianity is so provocative that it can't help but to stay with you. So when Thiel wrote that essay, maybe I think to express gratitude to the effect that your art had on him, and also maybe in a way to, in a kind of roundabout way, maybe admit his own participation in such a problematic system that we're all living in. But it's a very, very, very provocative and very good essay. And again, I'll mention the name of the collection. It's called Politics and Apocalypse. That's the name of the book. And it's a collection of essays by all different writers.
Well, I chuckled because along the way here, analyzing everything, and I started to say, wait a minute. In human history, there was the Age of Enlightenment. There was the Age of Reason, where paramount to everybody's attention were these ideas. I think, therefore I am. People wanted to find out what it really means to be human, and so we went through at times of the Renaissance. What was the energy into? The energy was into beauty and style, and you produced the Michelangelos, you produced the Da Vinci's. And certainly, this is not the Age of Enlightenment. This is not the Age of Reason. And all of the politics is about, insanity, that isn't the leadership. Cry for that kind of leadership. Again, most people's concerns come down to money and career. And like you said, the intellect, the material advancement. And this is where, stasis, antithesis, synthesis. And right now we're in the antithesis. We're in the upside-down world. And if you're just grasping for the tangibles, you're screwed. You're screwed. And so people, I think, I'm hoping they're going to go in what you're advocating and what I'm advocating. That, folks, you got to look at the things you just mentioned. You got to look at family. You got to look at community. You got to look at being more selfless than selfish. And what will come out on the other end will hopefully be what will help us all actualize.
Yes, I would agree that we have. I would say the way I would phrase it is that both American and global society need to be subjected to some kind of collective therapeutic process. That's what I would say.
Beautiful.
And the end game of any therapeutic process is the type of virtues and features that you just mentioned that would become more important to a person's day-to-day living versus simply an engagement in discourses of capitalism. I mean, I think it's important for people to have a house and have a job and of course work. This is very important. But the structure of work today and the interrelationship between labor and technology and how that affects the psychic, emotional, and really the symbolic placement of an individual is so problematic. It's unbelievable. And when you live in a place like Peru, like I do, and you look back into America, you can see it much more clearly. And it's really unbelievable. It's amazing that people tolerate the conditions that people live in right now. I mean, it's like the emotional and psychological intensity that people are subjected to on a daily basis. It's really terrifying, and it's really unjust. That's what it is.
All right, Brian, appreciate it. Brian Culkin, you can find him everywhere. Just Google him, and his works are brilliant. And again, thanks, Brian.